or riots. We've just had riots in Leeds, haven't we?
Yes, though that's of a completely different demographic to the kinds of people that are concerned and voting for reform.
But it speaks to just a simmering country right now, divisive, simmering, angry country.
Yes, that's because you've essentially allowed ethnic and religious colonies with antagonisms to the host population to exist in the country. I mean, I walked around Whitechapel a little while ago with Carl and former French presidential candidate Eric Zemmour, and he was being asked to show in some of the worst areas of London. We went to Whitechapel because the street signs there are in different languages, because there are people there who have come there and never have to interact with an English person in order to feel at home there. I mean, we just saw the other day, at the same time as those riots in Leeds, there were mobs of Bangladeshi men running through the streets in protest about a man who had been shot in Bangladesh by the Bangladeshi police. These are the politics of the subcontinent playing out on London streets. This shouldn't have to be in my home city, but it has been brought here. It's a profoundly unpleasant state of affairs when you're going through your capital city. And yes, there are ethnic enclaves, but something about the Leeds riots was that it was instigated because there was a Roma household who had seemingly mistreated their children. They were taken out by social services, and a police car was tipped over by other people that were living in the surrounding area. But they weren't all Roma people. They were Muslims, they were from Pakistan, they were from North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. There seems to be a sort of enclave set up in juxtaposition with the host population. They believe they live and exist outside of British law. They don't have to learn the language or assimilate and learn their customs. And it's actually very difficult to assimilate for two reasons. One, because if these people are from everywhere, then it's not like we can get to know them. It's not like a Vietnamese community moved down the road from me and set up a restaurant and there are like 3 families and I can go and say hello and maybe learn a few phrases and they can learn a few phrases of mine. I can try their food and we can make jokes about each other and we can slowly get to know each other. If nobody knows each other, then they pass each other with distrust because they're never going to be able to speak each other's languages. They can't know the customs. And if the churn of demographic change is so quick and so numerous, then the world on your doorstep feels just dizzying. And people feel insecure. And the other thing is as well, what are they assimilating into? Because anytime you hear a politician extol British values, it's always liberalism, pluralism, free speech, even though we're going to criminalize people praying inside their own head, all these sorts of things. It's unilateral multiculturalism. As Eric Kaufman likes to say, it's like telling the host nation of the World Fair to not have their own booth and just be content that the fair is there in the first place, right? And so if we don't have something proactive and admirable for people to assimilate into, then of course they're going to stick to their own native cultures and they're just going to treat Britain like a mercantile way station which provides them with rapidly diminishing economic opportunities with absolutely no loyalties to their town. And so when they have an adverse interaction with the police and they treat it like a provocation against the community, of course they're going to burn down the city because they feel no tie there. They haven't inherited anything that their ancestors have built. They often don't own the place because lots of them subsist on social housing. Like 72% of Somalis in this country live on social housing. That's not a good state of affairs for either the Somalis or the host population. And if they have no attachment to the physical place that they live or the culture in which they live, then of course you're going to see violence.
It's a really complicated one with regards, a lot of people, particularly in the States, they say there are parts of the UK that are no-go areas. And I wonder if just the term no-go is what is difficult for people, because I don't know if they're no-go, because I can walk through them. But I did find that, and I don't reveal where I live usually, but it's not a very Islamic area, but relative to the rest of the country. But I did, just as a sort of mind game the other day, sort of drove away from my house and I thought, I'm going to see how many minutes it takes before I see someone who isn't in Islamic costume. And it took a good 4 or 5 minutes of driving to find that. And then you have to get to the issue, well, is that an issue? I don't mind different kinds of people and different kinds of things. And it's not a no-go. I can walk through there.
Sorry, why?
Happily.
Why don't you mind that?
I don't have a problem with people having different views and beliefs to me.
The problem is that people are bearers of a civilization. They're custodians of a culture. And so if the house guests outnumber the homeowners, the home ceases to be a home. But they're going to rearrange the furniture as they see fit. And so if that's going to be democratic, well, then if by sheer plurality you're outnumbered, then you don't get a say in where that furniture's sent. And that's how it feels, especially to me. So when were you born, by the way?
89.
1998. So after things were only meant to get better.
You're 10 years younger than me?
Yes.
Bloody hell.
I've never known the world differently. Lots of people my age have never known the world differently.
But you make a good point, because I had a debate with David Baddiel about woke culture. And what was clear as we went on is I think we're very similar people, he and I, who have had very different experiences of the world. So he grew up with it firmly implanted in his mind that there is this hierarchy of racism, and it's very important. So he's quite woke in that, in my opinion anyway. He might disagree with that, but I found him to be quite woke, and he kept going back to things that I thought, well, that probably does make sense for somebody who grew up in the 70s or 80s or 90s. It really did, but that's not the world I grew up into, and you even less so. So we sort of almost get stuck with these ideas from when we're 18, and the world Badil grew up into was probably quite a racist, intolerant world. The world I grew up into was less so, and the world you grew up into was just, in terms of multiculturalism, it was just pushed and pushed and pushed, and I guess you're fed up. Do you find that the stereotype is that younger people, so what are you, 25? 25. Younger people, and maybe even young, 18, 19, 20, are all woke and maniacs and lunatics. But I've also heard that quite a few wanted to vote reform. Is there a pushback from the young?
So I believe reform was first, in at least the polling, right ahead of the day, among young men, 18 to 30, tied with Labour. Young women were mainly voting for left-wing parties, and this is something that's been replicated across Europe and in the US. Strangely not in France, because there was a large cohort of young women who came out and voted for Le Pen and Bardella, and I think that's because of safety. I mean, again, when we say, no-go areas might be inflammatory, not if you're a young woman. If you're a young woman walking through a diverse, non-English area of any major city at night is akin to being a man walking around with a transparent briefcase of $1 million. It's dangerous. And I don't think that's a desirable state of affairs to afflict on young women. And so I think that's another intolerable trade-off that has been made by woke ideologues, or liberals, as I often say as well. So,
but that is divisive, isn't it? Because the suggestion then, or people might take from what you're saying, that most immigrants who are non-English or from different parts of the world just can't control themselves and are all...
but I didn't say that, though.
What did you say?
I said that there are areas that are non-English that would provide a threat to young women. They're particularly vulnerable there. And the reason is the culture does not treat human dignity as inviolable. It often treats it as instrumental to what the most violent and ambitious man can claim for his own power and pleasure. And so even if the vast majority of people are good and law-abiding people, there is not a strong enough cultural bulwark to prevent a great many number of violent opportunists. And I think we can see this. Did you see the Ross Kemp documentary a few years ago where he went to South Africa?
No.
So he's speaking to a group of men there.
Yeah.
And they've admitted to being rapists. And
I did see this. Go on.
Yeah, and he says, are you not horrified by this? And they go, yeah, we could get the girl pregnant, or she could have an STD, or she could scream and we have some consequences for it. And he said, no, do you not feel bad for the woman as a victim? And they just gave him blank expressions. Because in parts of the world, women and children aren't seen as equal to men. They're not seen as human. Of course, I'm not saying equal as in the same. That's also the pitfalls of liberalism, but capable of manifesting equal moral worth and dignity.
Yeah. There's that video as well of the woman. Do you see that woman reporter who is, I think, in Egypt? Was it after an uprising? And it's just the most horrifying footage ever, because like the camera goes out and we know and what happened to her after. They're grabbing her clothes and just I don't even want to go into what happened to her.
Well, the point is as well with the grooming gangs in the UK. If I received a phone call from a cousin or a work colleague or a friend, and he said, hey, I've got this girl tied up at my place. She's 13. Do you want to come around and have a go? I don't know a single man that would say, yeah. I know lots of men that would go around and deal out vigilante justice against that man. Why is there a certain subset, a certain cultural community in this country where there is a great many number of men who will say yes to that? And it's an uncomfortable conversation to have, but it is true. And I think we should...
But how do we know that's true? I'm not saying you're wrong. How do we know that's true?
Because there have been various reports and court cases where the overwhelming number of perpetrators of rapes of young white English girls have been Pakistani Muslim men. And they're often related. And it's disgusting. And it's been covered up because the authorities were afraid of being called racist repeatedly. So I think we should be discriminating according to who we allow into the country, who is going to be a polite house guest.